I've been trying to trace the origins of Islam. But it's a bigger mystery than I'd ever imagined. This is the Holy Book of Islam, and it's the earliest source for Islam that we have. Find out where the Quran was composed, and you find out where Muhammad was operating, and then you get a picture of where Islam might have begun. In the Quran, it tells Muhammad to follow the path trod by Abraham. Maybe that's the place to start looking. I'm in Hebron, which is a town on the West Bank, and I'm currently in a Jewish settlement. But Hebron is also very much a Palestinian city, and so the atmosphere is probably as tense as it is anywhere between Israelis and Palestinians. There are Israeli soldiers here with very large guns. And what they're guarding is this, the burial place of Abraham. Abraham, through the line of his son Isaac, was the father of the Jews. When everyone else was still pagan, Abraham worshipped the one true God. And for this, God rewarded him and his descendants with the promised land, part of which today goes by the name of Israel. This is the tomb of Abraham. And the reason that the soldiers are here is that these are not the only people who regard him as their ancestor. And they're not the only people who believe that God gave them the promised land. On the other side of the grill are Muslims, and they tell a different story. This is the Muslim side, and the reason they revere Abraham is because, as well as Isaac, he had another son, Ishmael, the father of the Arabs. This is the tomb of Abraham that we saw earlier from the Jewish side, but we're now looking at it from the Muslim side. The significance of Abraham and this association that was made between Arabs and Ishmaelites, the children of Ishmael, is actually much older than Islam itself. It remains central to Islam to this day. According to Muslims, Abraham is their prophet, and the religion he founded was not the religion of the Jews, but Islam. And in the Quran, we read that Ishmael helped Abraham to build a house of God at a place called Mecca. Neither the Quran nor any contemporary source actually specifies where Mecca was, but Muslims now would have absolutely no doubt that Mecca is another name for a place deep in the Arabian deserts. Mecca. The holiest city in Islam. The birthplace of Muhammad. This is the largest mosque in the world. At its center, the Kaaba, the house of God, first built by Abraham and his son Ishmael, on foundations laid by the first man, Adam. It is older and holier than anywhere else in the world. It was in the hills above the city that Muhammad received the first of his revelations from God. These revelations would form the holy book of Islam, the Quran, the very word of God. Mecca is where Muslims believe everything began. The crossroads of faith and history. Surely here then, you would think, we could find solid evidence for Islam's beginnings. But there is a problem. Aside from a single ambiguous mention in the Quran itself, there is no mention of Mecca, not one, in any datable text for over 100 years after Muhammad's death. How can we know that Muhammad does come from Mecca?
We can't. But on the other hand, if he doesn't come from there, you have to come up with a plausible alternative for where he might have come from. And why would you want to take that on?
Why take it on? Well, it's what historians do. If things don't fit, you try something else that might fit.
Here we go.
So this is it.
Yeah, here we are.
In the Quran, the faithful are instructed to pray in the direction of a holy sanctuary. But what it doesn't ever say is that this sanctuary stood at Mecca. And to some archaeologists, a few early mosques suggest something different.
We're talking about one of the earliest examples we have of a mosque.
And you date 100 years after Muhammad?
Somewhere within 100 years or so. Because here, as we go into it, you can see...
This is it?
This is it, yeah?
This is the mosque.
This is the mosque. And what you can see here, we have an apse which is not facing Mecca. It's not facing the south. It's actually facing towards the east, towards the sun rising. This is an example of the time before the direction had actually been preferred towards Mecca.
So the implication of that is that at this early stage of Islam, the focus of prayer has not yet been absolutely fixed.
The direction of prayer had not been well established yet.
So it's a bit like the concrete hasn't yet set. It's that you can still play with it, you can still fiddle around with it, you can experiment with it.
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Not a decisive clue, perhaps. But it is suggestive that even though there are no Muslim sources, there are reports from Christian writers of the time that the Arab conquerors bowed their heads in prayer not in the direction of Mecca, but in a quite different direction, somewhere further north. In the Quran, it never actually states that Muhammad lived in Mecca, nor that Mecca was where the first revelations took place. Does the material in the Quran point to Mecca being the setting for God's revelations to Muhammad?
No, it doesn't. I mean, there is mention of a sanctuary. There is a sanctuary, for sure. But where is that sanctuary? That's, of course, we can't tell.
It's devilishly difficult to sort of extract what the context might have been from the text itself.
In Muslim tradition, the people of Mecca are pagans, worshippers of idols. But in fact, the people the Quran describes have a deep and sophisticated knowledge of the biblical tradition.
The Quran retells biblical stories and alludes to biblical stories, not just biblical, but also post-biblical developments. All this is clearly known to the audience.
Suggests that what we have is a kind of response on the part of, let us say, Muhammad, to the debates that were going on in Christian and Jewish communities, where they were debating theological issues and questions that come out of the Hebrew Bible and come out of the New Testament. And the Quran seems to be an effort to engage in the discussion. And so there's a strong connection with the late antique religious discourses that were alive throughout the Near East.
So it's obviously not a pagan world we're looking for. The people in the Quran worship a single God, But it then accuses them of praying to beings other than God. And there's something else. The people the prophet addresses in the Quran are farmers, agriculturalists. But there was no agriculture in Mecca.
Mecca does not have an agrarian base. In Mecca, it seems to have been quite an arid valley.
If Mecca is this barren, infertile place, how is it that in the Quran the opponents of the prophet are described as keeping cattle and growing olives and vines?
Good question. This is one of the reasons why some scholars feel that the text of the Quran is really plugged into, say, Syria.
Because that's where vines and olives grow,
you would find
much
those
further
in
north.
Geographical Syria, where you don't find olive trees in Mecca.
So if Mecca wasn't the starting point of Islam, what was? If you're following the clues in the Quran itself, then you're looking for a landscape inhabited by olive-growing Arabs who have a deep knowledge of the biblical tradition, but whose worship of a single God might seem to some a little shop-soiled. This is the city of Avdad, in the Negev desert. Roman Empire believed in God, and God believed in the Roman Empire. But then, in the year 636, God changed his mind. Arab marauders appear outside the walls. Sophronius, the city's bishop, writes that it is too dangerous to leave. The Arabs were closing in, and there was nothing people of Christian Jerusalem could do about it except to stay where they were, look out from their walls, and await the arrival of the Arabs. And out of the desert they came, and they had become irresistible. In 636, they beat a Roman army at Yarmouk. Soon after, they beat a Persian army at Qadisiyah. Both empires too weak after their own long wars to resist the Arabs. They marched into the richest provinces of the defeated empires. And less than 5 years after the death of Muhammad, they set their eyes upon the promised land. The land flowing with milk and honey, the land that God had promised to the Jews. Now, the Arabs had come to claim that birthright for themselves. The children of Israel had made it a Jewish land. The Romans had made it a Christian, holy land. If the Arabs did arrive with a new religion, then we should be able to find its imprint here. Contemporary Christian sources confirm that late in the 630s, the Arabs took over Jerusalem by peaceful negotiation. But what they don't say is what the conqueror's religion was.
The truth of the matter is we don't know what was the true religion of the first Arab conquerors.
We have a problem because this group of people from Arabia is tiny, and they're ruling over much larger populations who are very well versed theologically, of Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians, but very sophisticated religious ideas. Why would these populations not have risen up in rebellion against their Muslim rulers if these Muslim rulers are trying to impose something totally different that was hostile to their own beliefs?
What were the Arabs up to? What were their motives? We know they called themselves believers, but believers in what? Certain Christian contemporaries tell us that the Arabs believed in a single God and that they followed a guide or instructor. But in general, their understanding of what the Arabs believed was deeply confused. Was it a form of Judaism or some kind of Christianity? Or did they have a whole new religion of their own?
For the Jews as well as for the Christians, these are people coming from the desert. They don't know who these people are. They don't really know what they believe. They hear things.
But perhaps there was a clue. At first, the new Arab rulers seemed closer to the Jews. They weren't interested in the Christian holy places. Instead, they began praying on the ruins of the old Jewish temple. All this only added to the Christians' sense of paranoia. Behind the invasion of the Arabs, they began to suspect a Jewish conspiracy. The moment the Arabs took over Jerusalem, they headed straight up here to what then as now is a broad, open, man-made esplanade. The holiest place to Jews anywhere in the world. So the fact that the Arab conquerors came up here and started building a prayer hall on such a sensitive spot inevitably served to raise quite a few eyebrows.
The Jews hope that these Arabs from the desert come as liberators. They permitted the Jews to come back to the Temple Mount and pray there. And the Jews started believing that maybe there is something messianic in these people, and maybe their leader is the Messiah who will permit them to rebuild the temple. Christian theologians who speak about the Arab conquerors find it very hard to understand that they are dealing with a new religion. Who are they?
One thing is absolutely clear. Nobody had any notion that the Arabs were doing what they were doing in the name of a freshly minted and coherent new religion, still less that what they were doing was in the name of something called Islam. So did Islam even exist in those early years after Muhammad? In Jerusalem, 30 years after the conquest, it was business as usual. There were Christian pilgrims in the streets. The churches were full. Ancient religions were practicing their ancient rites. But where was the prophet in all this? 30 years after the death of Muhammad, here in Jerusalem, an Arab warlord called Muawiyah was hailed as leader of the new Arab Empire. But if Muawiyah was a Muslim, then he showed precious little sign of it. The astonishing thing is that nowhere, not on his inscriptions, not on his coins, not on any of his documents, is there so much as a single mention of Muhammad.